Um, so 1 Samuel. Am I speaking into this? 1 Samuel 25, starting from verse 1, and that's page 209. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Maon. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not ill-treat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable towards my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them.' When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?' David's men turned round and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, 'Put on your swords.' So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Nabal's wife Abigail, 'David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not ill-treat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us all the time, and we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over your master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him.' Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, 'Go ahead, I'll follow you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, 'It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him.' When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, 'My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant." David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought to him, and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house, holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing until daybreak. Then, in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong, and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her head to the ground and said, "Here is your maidservant, ready to serve you and wash the feet of my master's servants." Abigail quickly got on the donkey and, attended by her 5 maids, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Gilead.
You want to have 1 Samuel 25 in front of you. Ben, just on my mic, not the main one, just mine, just take it up a tad, would you? Is that one, Mark? You sure? Oh, it's usually that one. Oh, is it changed round, is it? Okay, lovely. Great. 1 Samuel 25, grab a hold of that. Emily, hurry up. Brilliant. Okay, just a quick reminder, a bit of a shout out. Every now and again I have to do a little shout out. What time do we start, people? Gosh, what time do we start? Tom, what time do we start? Weston, what time do we start? Jason, what time do we start? Remember what the great and blessed Bill always used to say, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're 15 minutes late. Okay? Get here by 22 people, alright? You can get to work on time, you get to church on time. Brilliant. Too much grace around here, we need a bit of law. Lovely, okay? Bethany, you look like you're about to pass out. You're in the land of the living? You're very tired. Is that jet lag? Brilliant. Well, it's a good job we've got a great story that's going to capture our hearts. Listen, I'm not quite... I've been trying for the last 6 days to figure out a summary to why this bit of the Bible is here. It's something to do with the kind of kingdom that Jesus brings. And it's in contrast to the kind of way that you try to build everything else in your life. Something about power to push through and deal with brokenness. We want to take matters into our own hands, a little bit like last week as we were looking at that. But there's something about the way the Lord gets in our way and doesn't let us do it our way. He will only do good his way. Now, if you're not totally sure what I'm saying, that's because I'm not either. So we need to pray that the Lord would help us understand this concept that he's playing around in this chapter, okay? Let's bow our heads together. Lord, please would you help us? It's such a vivid and powerful story, but we don't want to miss it or misapply it. Please would you help us to figure out how to press on in faith, adore and worship you, and serve this community. In Jesus' name. Amen. Brilliant. So we're going to be introduced to the three main characters. If you look down into verse 1, verse 2 and verse 3, we will meet them. Somebody shout out the name of the three main characters in this story, please. David is one of them. Abigail. Nabal. Okay? We know that David is the anointed king who is on the run being chased down by Saul. And chapter 24 and chapter 26, we've got these instances where David has an opportunity to take matters into his own hands and get the power that he has been promised. And in both those occasions, he is restrained in and of himself and says, I will not do what I know only the Lord will do. But something happens in the midst of this story which is a little bit different. And the occasion for that is the meeting of his men with a guy called Nabal. Look down at verse 1 and 2, 3. What do we find out about Nabal? What do we know about him? I'll tell you what his name means. His name means fool. Now, we don't know how he got his name, but we know that he lived up to his name. What else do we know about him from in there? What else do we know? He's wealthy. In fact, it says there, great wealth. It's the word fat. He was fat with wealth. We would call that being loaded. But isn't it interesting that we find out more about his situation in life, i.e. the stuff he has got, before we even find out about his name? It tells you a little bit about the direction of travel of his life. But we also find a few other things about him. He's one of those divvies that you find on Twitter who's always like sounding off on other people because he values his opinion more than others. He's like, I've got nothing to learn from you. I've got my little kingdom and it's all about money and you lot can get lost. He's also shady in his business dealings. And that makes you wonder why he is married to this young lady. This lady, her name is... And she couldn't be any more different. If he is a buffoon with books, she is a beauty with brains. What does it say about her there? What does it say about her? She's bright and beautiful woman. Now, this is the idea, not just a physical beauty. In the original, it's about a countenance. Have you seen that? There's something about somebody that it can shine out of them when there's a strength of character within that just shines out and you see a beautiful countenance. So they might not sort of be on the front page of Cosmo, but there's a woman who's got strength of character and a real beauty that shines out and is attractive. And this is Abigail. So Abigail, I found out the meaning of that this week. Her father's joy. That's a great name for a daughter, isn't it? You know, Matty's got an Abigail. You know, her father's joy. That is the name, meaning of the name Abigail. And everything's going fine until David comes along, because he's in the south of the country and he's been on the run and he's got 600 men with him. They all need feeding. They don't want to be on the run. In fact, they're in a period of 7 years of being on the run. Can you imagine the temptations that are there? And around them, they find Nabal and his gang have got something like 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. They've got everything they want, and it was not unusual for the Philistines to come along and just raid anybody with anything. So if the Philistines want it because might is right, they took it. But not David and his men. Can you imagine the temptation? They were like, well, we're going to be honourable. We're going to serve. And it came to shearing time. Now, you don't know what shearing time is, but it's like cashing out at the end of the day. So at the end of the season, everybody who has contributed to the well-being of that clan getting a load of stuff would receive something back in return. So those who did the shearing and those who did the feeding and those who did the shepherding and those who did the protecting. Back in those days, there wasn't a police force. So David, we find, had been protecting Nabal's business interests. Nabal was getting rich off David's men, and David's men were just serving and doing right and being caring and doing an honourable thing. So the way that society worked back there, the way that convention worked, was that on that shearing season, on that feast day, the owner would bring everybody in who's contributed it and honour them back in return for the part that they'd played and give them a little bit of a feast. And so, with that in mind, we find in verse 4, while David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep, so he went he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name," which is more than just, you owe us stuff. It's not that that's going on here. We've actually been thrown together by circumstance. You've been benefiting from me, and I want to deepen that relationship. So I'm going to give you my name. I'm approaching you. You've heard of me. My name is David, and I've been anointed. I've been appointed to defeat Goliath. The Lord's hand is upon me. I've got a future here, and I want to connect with you. So he sent the 10 young men, said, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him," and look at the graciousness and the open-handedness, dare I say, vulnerability. "Long life to you." I want good for you. "Good health to you." I want you to succeed in everything to work out. "And your household, and good health to all that is yours." I'm coming to bless. You probably don't even realise up to this point how much blessing you have already received from me, and I'm coming with more besides. Let's get connected. Now, verse 7, "I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not ill-treat them," which is really unusual for back in those days. "And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing." By the way, that's down to us, you know. We wanted blessing for you. "Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, do what is just common custom." Let's enter this. Let's take this further. Let's go further with this. "Come at therefore, be favourable towards my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David," notice the connection there he's making, "whatever you can find for them." He doesn't demand it, he doesn't insist it, he speaks with dignity and respect to Nabal, and he presents himself there. So this is the kind of approach that the anointed king is giving to this guy, Nabal. How gracious! And isn't it interesting that the way we respond to people as they approach us says an awful lot about us? It says an awful lot about two things. Number one, what we think of ourselves, and number two, what we think of them. And we're about to find out from Nabal what he's made of, what he thinks of himself, and what he thinks of the one who is approaching. And of course, always when we read the Bible like this, we're supposed to see something. David is the anointed and the appointed who has been blessing a fool, and now he moves towards a fool to bring more blessing and grace. How will the fool respond? And so we see it here, and it's terribly, terribly offensive. Verse 9, "When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants." Later on we find that he poured scorn or screamed at them. So this wasn't said calmly. This was said in a rage. "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to the men coming from who knows where?" 8 times it's personal pronouns. Mine, mine, mine. Who? And then, who the monkeys are you? You're not. Who do you think you are? I ain't got no respect for you. And you see in this moment, he thinks he's awesome and he thinks David is nothing. Is he right? So that's the problem with when you're a fool, you see everything totally out of balance. You just don't see straight. You think you're a self-made person. Me, my, I. It's all about me. We find later on that, utterly oblivious later on, he's throwing a party as if he were a king. He just thinks he's king and in control of everything in his life, and that he can control his destiny, and that he is dependent on no relationship. He doesn't want anything. He's just like, I'll do it my way. It was C.S. Lewis who said this. "A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you." He can't even see who David is, so he scorns him. Listen, there are many Nabals in this world. You and I have a tendency towards that. It's sort of the, dare I say, the spat of a teenager who thinks they see better than they do and doesn't realise how needy they are. And praise the Lord that some of us sometimes, occasionally, move in the direction of growing out of that tendency. But here he is, he doesn't realise who he is messing with. Who is David? David is the greatest warrior on the face of the planet in that day. And he comes in the name of the Lord. And if David can face down, take on, and easily defeat with a rock and a bit of cloth Goliath, he'd make mincemeat out of Nabal. But Nabal is so up himself, he doesn't realise who he's messing with. Which takes us on to David's response. Verse 12. David's men turned round and went back. Would you have liked that job? This isn't going to go well. I'm going to have a word with David. I'm just going to report it honestly, and then I'm going to duck. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, and notice there's no time here. No time whatsoever. Put on your swords. Armour up. Get ready. We're going into battle. They put on their swords and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David while 200 stayed with the supplies. And that is totally, don't you dare judge David, because that's what you do. Somebody slights you a little bit, especially if you've tried to do them good. Do you take it sitting down? No, you physically feel it, don't you? Somebody insults you, you feel the wrong. That's the thing about justice. And one of the greatest things about David was he was bold and brave to deal with injustices, but that has an ugly sister to it, in that here, in this moment, he flies off the handle. We find in a minute that his plan was not just to go and deal with Nabal, but to just wipe out and deal with all the guys. He was going to pull out a shotgun to deal with a cockroach. He was going to do something shady. And that's what rage and anger does. When was the last time you were raging and angry? You see, some of you have different levels of that, don't you? Sometimes it's not an outward outburst, but it's just a disposition of frustration and defensiveness and indignance to people. David here was utterly indignant. When I have lost my temper, I've lost my reason too. I'm never proud of anything which angrily I do. When I have talked in anger and my cheeks are flaming red, I'm always uttering something that I wish I'd never said. In anger, I have never done a kindly deed or wise, but many things for which I ought, I find I need to apologise. And looking back across my life at all I've lost or made, I can't recall a single time when fury ever paid. David was incredibly patient and able to entrust the Lord with the nonsense of Saul, but when he faced down an insult from an idiot, what does he do? He goes ballistic. And it would have been a bloodbath, and that would have changed the direction of travel of his whole kingship, but for one thing, verse 14. And we don't know the name of this guy, but I like him, whoever he is. One of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at him. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not ill-treat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. They were dead honest. They were straight up with us. Who'd have thought it? They protected, they helped us, night and day. In other words, they committed themselves to this. They went out of their way. They were a wall around us all the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. That's the thing, you can't rebuke a fool, because the fool won't listen, will they? And this is one of his own employees saying, there's no talking to him. We're dead. Is there any chance, Abigail, that you could do anything about this? And this is what I like about Abigail. She's discerning, she's beautiful, and she's decisive. This girl is a keeper. Not least of all, she knows how to deal with angry men. How do you deal with angry men? Feed them. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep. This girl knows how to pack a picnic, people. Ladies, take note. 5 whatever they are, of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. Not too bothered about that bit. And loaded them on a donkey. And she goes out. Now, I want you to imagine this, and this is the point of tension and the point of drama in this story. You've got the most lethal warrior on the face of the planet of the day, with 400 guys behind him, because 200 guys left to look after the baggage. That's a first. And they're on their horses, and they are charging down the valley. And David is red-faced, and he is, you know what it's like when you're marching up them steps, and you're like, I tell you, I'm going to sort them out, I'm going to tell them, and you're talking to, and it's building a head of steam, and your cheeks are red, and your nostrils are flared, and the horses are charging, and the spit is flying, and the sweat is coming, and there's 400 of them charging down that hill. If you like, a caravan of retaliation. And there, walking the other way, humbly with her head bowed low, with a donkey and a couple of servants, is a caravan of reconciliation. Would you get in the way of that charging lunatic? You wouldn't want to, would you? Notice what she does. Verse 19. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. And she goes into the middle of the road, and as she sees them approaching, she gets down off her donkey, and she kneels humbly in the midst of the rage, against the rage. She confronts the rage. She gets in the way of rage. And it's amazing the way that she does this. Notice what she does. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet. Remember, in those days, a wife would have been viewed almost as the property of another guy. And as we know, it wasn't social convention there for a woman to approach another person, let alone another man, let alone get in his way. And so she comes with great humility. She doesn't get cocky. She doesn't act up. She speaks respectfully, my Lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak. Hear what your servant has to say. May my Lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is a fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Do you see what she does? She gets in the way of wrath. She says, put it on me. I totally understand why you feel the way you do, but don't lower yourself. He's a man who's an idiot, and it goes with him wherever he goes, and sooner or later comes back on his face. But you don't go that way. And as you sit there, some of you are remembering times when somebody, and you didn't want them to. We never do when we're angry, do we? But somebody got in your way in love. Somebody tried to slow you down. And for them, it was really costly. It's really costly to move towards an angry person. Because if you get in the way of an angry person, who are they likely to be most angry at? You. And she's a model here of doing this gently and humbly and graciously. And she identifies and she goes, I know, I've been living with this fella, but I don't know how. I know he's a fool. And I'm not saying what happened is right. But don't let your anger rule the day. Don't let your anger win. And we need to find out why. You see, many other wives in this situation, being married to a fool, would be like, this is brilliant. This is my out. I can get away. Awesome. He's a divvy. David will do this. I'll be left with me 3,000 sheep. Awesome. But in verses 26 and following, we find that she is a spiritual woman who sees something differently. Because we need to go back to David. You know, David responded almost as soon as he heard of the offence. His anger was up in the air. What does David normally do when he is faced with something difficult? When he is faced with an injustice? What does he normally do? He slows down and he seeks the Lord. But in this moment, he's dwelling merely on the horizontal. If truth be known, and you know this, sometimes when you're angry, you actively don't want to hear about the Lord. You want to be the Lord. You want to deal with it. You want to deal with it your way. But what does she do? She's humble, she's gracious, but she invites the Lord's anointed back into the world where the Lord is good and God. 7 times between verses 26 and 31, she mentions the name of the Lord. She's saying, this isn't going to happen in a vacuum. Let's go vertical with this. Can you see it there? Now, since the Lord has kept you, God's involved, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. Do you see that? She's giving him a picture of who he is. You live under the Lord and he's for you. You don't have to be that way. Because this way is directly out of the playbook of another king, and his name's Saul. You're going to be different because the Lord's with you. Verse 27. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive. Forgive your servant's offence. That's the kind of king that the Lord wants you to be, David. Remember? Your job is dealing with the Goliaths, not flattening the fools. You're going to fight the Lord's battles to win a victory for his people. Don't let your kingship be taken in a different direction. Please forgive your servant's offence, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live, because you can't be the Lord's anointed king if there is. Because in the Lord's king there must be no evil. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. You are somebody who is living in the light of the Lord. He has got you. Live out of that. Don't live out of your anger. We fight that, don't we, when we're angry? We want to live out of our anger, not live out of the abundant bundle that the Lord has wrapped us up in. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. She's remembering, she knows the story of what happened with David and Goliath and is alluding to it. When the Lord has done for my master everything good he promised concerning him and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. I know the Lord is going to deal with this. Wow. What kind of king do we need? We need a king who is not touched by evil, who doesn't do whimsical revenge, who is perfect and good and takes on himself the offences of others that a greater goal may be fulfilled. Who does that sound like? Turn over quickly in your Bible to 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. Remember, so much of the book of Samuel is to show us what kind of kingdom we're going to live under and what the real king is supposed to be like. And sometimes David is living up to us and giving us an example, and sometimes he's an anti-example. And here we've got a beauty with 2 beasts, and David happens to be one of the beasts, but the Lord keeps him and holds him back up to this point to make sure that he is going to give us the right example of the true king who one day will come. And we find out what he is like in 1 Peter chapter 2, and we start to read at verse 21. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. So this anointed king, the Lord Jesus, is not a threat to a fool. He's not going to extend his kingdom by retaliation. He's going to do it by service. He's going to do it by absorbing wrath, not acting in wrath. Do we see this? So we know that Jesus is like that, but what about David? What about David? Back to 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 32. David said to Abigail, "Get out of my way, you stupid cow!" Is that what he said? That's not what it says in the Hebrew. Now, can I remind you, this isn't easy for David, because back in those days, you've got a woman who's kneeling down with her head bowed, speaking words, trying to bring him back to common sense where the Lord is God. And who's he got behind him? 400 guys strapped with swords who are looking to David as their leader. And he's being gently rebuked by a woman in front of his mates. How do you think that's going to go? And herein we see the difference between David and Saul. What does David do? Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. He suddenly goes vertical. He goes, hallelujah. I was going to do something totally stupid and you got in the way. And it was because the Lord loves me and he sent you to get in my way. Please, fellas, if your wife has ever got in your way, praise the Lord and thank her. If it was in front of your mates and rather rude, ask her to do it more gently and more sensibly and in a discerning and more beautiful way next time. Maybe it's not your missus, maybe it's somebody else in your life who has come in and got in your way and you're almost angry about it. Maybe because you're angry at yourself. What you need to do is you need to say, Lord, thank you that you've sent people to get in my way from being an idiot. Verse 33, may you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive at daybreak. And this is the humility when the Lord puts somebody in our way. He's always getting in our way. Many times he's got in your way this week, and I wonder whether you've responded. Maybe it was through a situation or a moment of hesitation or by a person. But when he gets in our way, how will we respond? Will we say, thank you, Lord? Thank you that you've not let me live in the kingdom of Saul, but in the kingdom of light. To live under who Jesus is and what he has done. Flannery O'Connor wrote this at the tender age of 21 in her diary. She said this: "It doesn't take much to make us realise what fools we are, but the little it takes is long in coming. I see my ridiculous self by degrees." So David had a big moment of revelation, but as we'll see later on, he didn't live in it all the time. But the question for you and I is, as the Lord gets in our way, how will we respond? Will we let him restrain us? It's a painful thing to be restrained, isn't it? It's a kind of suffering. It's hard and it hurts because it feels so right to act out, take charge, and charge on with the way that we think the kingdom should run. But here, David, he's not being self-congratulatory. He's just going to be humble and recognise. And deep down, he's thankful. I wonder whether you're at the point where you're praying, Lord, if there's people who can get in my way, in the things that I do, in the way that I respond to hard things in life, when I want to play it out as if you don't exist, when I want to make choices in that moment that reflect the fact that I live more in the two-dimensional than the three-dimensional, Please, Lord, would you send more things or people to get in my way, and when I see them, would you give me a humility to respond to them? And you can only do that if you know that the Lord is going to deal with things in the end. And so we move on to the last part of the story. Verse 35, when David accepted from her hand what she had brought to him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." Meanwhile, does Nabal know any of this that is going on? Does he know that he was sitting under impending destruction? He's utterly oblivious. He's carrying on and doing his feast. I mean, this is how bad it has got. Verse 36, when Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, okay? Not just drunk, he was next level, very drunk. It's a picture of his spiritual well-being, utterly blind and stupid. So she told him nothing until the daybreak because he needed to sober up. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things. And what happened? Some sort of stroke came upon him. His heart failed and he became like a stone. He was in some sort of coma of some sort, it would seem. And 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. You see, David never needed to take matters into his own hands because the Lord was going to oversee that all of his enemies ultimately were put before laid before his feet and crushed. The Lord has got this. He's got it totally. And here was this fool who was blissfully unaware of trying to live and crack out on his own against the king, that sooner or later he was going to come to a sticky end. Is that a parable for speak or what? People living as if they're kings, but they're actually fools. They're rejecting the kind advance of the king. They don't realise they're storing up wrath. They're carrying on as drunk, but one day the Lord will deal with that because there is only one big dog and Jesus is his name. It happened in the days of Jesus' flesh. Do you remember when he came and he's the anointed king and the Pharisees were riling against him and giving him all kinds and hatching plans to get rid of him? And all that time he was patient and gracious, going to a cross where he would pay for people's sins. And some of them accepted, and many of them rejected, and the Lord has dealt with them. And there's a question that's outstanding here, isn't it? Because here's 7 years of David being chased down by Saul. Why is it that for 7 years he's being pursued by Saul, but in just 10 days one of his enemies, Nabal, gets dealt with? Why is that? I mean, maybe David even prayed, Lord, why haven't you dealt with Saul the way that you've dealt with Nabal? Just show the world you can't stand up against the Lord's anointed. Answer: David and us needed to realise what kind of kingdom we're a part of. We're not part of a kingdom that advances by powerful kicking off, taking matters into our own hands. We are a kingdom under a king that advances through service, gentle approach, sacrifice, enduring scorn, and trusting that it is the Lord who will establish by his strength, not human strength. Now that is absolutely amazing. We are in a kingdom where the Lord is going to show and teach us what kind of kingdom it is, because we always want to drift back into taking matters into our own hands and dealing with things in a worldly way. And so that's a good reason for us to sing the next song that we're going to sing. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord restrains, he keeps back. He is the one who will not slip us very far from this. And any time we try, he'll get in our way because he's faithful. Let's stand and sing together.